So I'm back. Here in Denmark we have something called efterårsferie, which is some kind of like autumn break or autumn vacation. So that's it. Now we're back and I'm still using Linux almost for 2 months now. And it's still great. My setbacks and wishing to come back to Windows is non-existent anymore. So I am fully dedicated to Linux and it's great. So being a new user to Linux, I want to talk about Linux pros and cons. Of course, this is my perspective and it doesn't mean it is universally true. We are all different users of computers and operating systems. So this is my take on Linux and how I perceive it while using it. Of course, keep in mind that I've been a Windows user for a lot of years, since Windows 3.1 and Windows 95 at least. One of the things that I really love in Linux is your privacy. And this is one of the main reasons why I switched to Linux from Windows 10. As we all know, Microsoft and Windows 10 are really trying to destroy Windows users' privacy. And this is what got me to Linux, and I really enjoy this heightened privacy. If you wanna have still some shreds of your privacy, then come to Linux, because Linux does not data mine your settings and everything and all the informations that you leave behind you. Linux does not send this information to any company. You still have to take some precautions when using internet in Linux, but Linux as such, as a distribution, does not send any information to third parties. Second thing that I really love in Linux, and I consider as a pro, is stability. I actually was quite satisfied with Windows, at least since Windows XP in regards to stability. Windows 7 was probably my favorite operating system. But things got worse in Windows 10. And not initially, but at least since this year, 2019, when Windows or Microsoft implemented several new features in their updates. And for some reason I began to experience blue screen of death, and it's also one of the reasons I switched to Linux. But if we take this thing aside, I was quite content with Windows operating systems throughout the years, just not that much Windows 10, at least in 2019. Third thing that I really like in Linux is speed. Things are just happening fast. If I start GIMP, well, 2 seconds and it's up. This is something that is not happening in Windows, at least not to my knowledge, with a lot of heavy duty apps. Krita as well, 2-3 seconds. This is a bit heavier than GIMP for some reason, and most of things just are really snappy. My Olive video editor comes almost instantly, and so do a lot of other apps. Let's take a look at LibreOffice Writer. 2 seconds and it's up, ready to go. This is it. So speed is quite noticeable in Linux. Then fourth thing is being a long-time Windows user, I actually used a lot of apps, be it Adobe Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, InDesign, or Sony Vegas, and whatnot. I used a lot of proprietary applications in Windows, and of course these mentioned apps, they're not available on Linux. But I found a few alternatives in Linux, and I talked about this in some of my previous videos, and I'm pretty satisfied with them. So actually there's not too many things or programs that I really miss in Linux. I don't have Photoshop in Linux, but I do have GIMP and Krita. I don't have Sony Vegas. That's a bit sucky, but I actually found a wonderful project that's still in alpha, and it's called Olive. So, Inkscape instead of Illustrator, and so on. Somehow I found this new ground in Linux that suits me well, and so far it's been great. Then there is fifth thing, and it's flexibility. There are so many choices in Linux. Let's talk about desktop environment. In Windows, there is only one shell, as we know it. We all know how it looks, and there are certain applications you can run and get these layers on top of your Windows. But in Linux, there are so many so-called desktop managers, and from XD, KDE, Cinnamon, and it is actually Cinnamon I am running on my Linux. Then there is GNOME, or GNOME, someone call it. I like these, I'm a European, I like to say, the G, GNOME. Then there is XFCE, a wonderful D, and many more. So I like these possibilities in Linux. You don't have to be stuck with just one thing, be it whatever, if it's file manager or desktop environment. You can change it and customize it to your liking. So this is one very important thing in Linux, for me at least, and it is the choices, and flexibility. Now comes a thing that is valid for me, and I can only speak for myself. But switching to Linux made me use social media to much less extent. I am no longer very active on Facebook and Twitter. Well, actually, I never really liked Twitter. Everything happens so quickly. But I used Facebook not because I loved Facebook as a company and as a social media, but I have a lot of friends and family members who are living abroad and far away. So Facebook has been a great channel to communicate with them. And I'm still using Facebook, but for some reason to much less extent. However, being a great supporter and lover of open source software, I'm on Mastodon. This is sort of Twitter-ish alternative on as an open source, and I am trying to use it. So far I have no many friends, and I like it. It looks cool, and I'm called Desmond here, desktop monologues. So this is a great point for me, I get to use Linux and things I like to do. I write. I'm a media scientist and historian, so I like to write articles and so on. And Linux gives me, in a weird sense, much more time to do these things, beside tinkering and tweaking my Linux distribution, which is at the moment Linux Mint 19.2. So much less on social media. This is really something I noticed and like so much. Next thing is, if you need help in Linux, there's so much help to get online. And if you get, some problem with your graphics card or sound, DAC system or whatever, you can search online, be it Google, DuckDuckGo, or Linux forums, and you will get the needed help. Linux community is very, very helpful. At least this is my experience. I know certain distributions are newbie hostile, and we all hear these stories from time to time. But being a Linux Mint user, I have only experienced friendliness from other users, not only Linux Mint, but also, Arch, Manjaro, Ubuntu, and so on. Users, they all wanted to help me. This is something I experienced, both on YouTube and Linux Mint forums and so on. So there is a lot of help to get if you're stuck or if you're having trouble with your Linux distribution. And this is something that is very important. Of course, using Windows will also get you a lot of help online. So I'm not saying being a Windows user that you're just lost if you get any trouble. Of course, that is not true. But Linux community is really friendly, at least in my experience so far. And the last pro I will mention this time is that Linux gives you an opportunity to really give a new life to your maybe aging hardware that you're having. There are so many distributions out there that you can use if you're having an older computer. As said, I am using Mint, and it can be used on older computers. Probably not Cinnamon. It is possible. I actually installed Linux Mint, Cinnamon, and Mate on both of my parents' laptops. So they are running, and their laptops are like 4 or 5 years old. So it is possible running Mint on that kind of hardware. MX Linux, I know, is made for older hardware. So is Lubuntu and Ubuntu. Antiques also, probably Arch as well if you're not running GNOME or Plasma KDE. Parrot, and I know there is Peppermint and Lubuntu as well. I ran Lubuntu on my 10-year-old laptop, and it worked fine. And then there is, Puppy Linux. Where is Puppy Linux? Puppy Linux is on 24th place in distro watch. Puppy Linux is a great little distro that is made for running on old computers. And look at it. It just looks fabulous in my opinion, and it doesn't require a lot of RAM, memory, resources on your computer. And you can run it on USB, and you can even save, the things on the said USB. So you can just plug it in, do your work, plug it out, and go home and do whatever you like. This is Puppy Linux. And this is what I'm talking about. You can't install Windows 10 on 7-year-old laptops. Well, probably you can, but it will be a pain using it. And the same goes for Apple and Mac OS. But Linux, there are tons and tons of distributions that you can run on, really antique hardware, and it will give a totally new life to your computer. Puppy Linux is one of them, Lubuntu, and so on. So many things and so much to choose that it's insane. So these are pros that I can list and say about Linux. Now let's mention a few cons in Linux, at least in my experience. The first thing I experienced when I installed Linux Mint on my computer is that it couldn't recognize my wireless connection. My Wi-Fi simply was not there. It wasn't recognized. So I had to search a lot of forums, and I found a few suggestions what to do. So I installed some third-party drivers, and it worked. But every time I install a new kernel on Linux, this Wi-Fi driver and connection just disappear. So you have to actually install your Wi-Fi drivers and probably some other drivers as well every time you install a new kernel. A con, but it's not the end of the world. So I just do that, and 1 minute later my Wi-Fi is on again. Second thing, it's games. Even though that I have a Steam installed on my Linux, and I am so happy about it. There are many games that are not gonna work in Linux. I am truly happy that City Skylines is working in Linux, and that Football Manager, at least 2015, is working in Linux, and so is Infested Planet and Northgard and Prison Architect and Stellaris and The Swapper and War Thunder and many more are working in Steam, either natively or through Proton. As you can see, Infested Planet is not run natively in Linux, but it runs through Steam Play and Proton, which is great. There are a few games, at least the one I really miss in Linux, and it is Far Cry 5. Luckily, I played around, 40-50 hours in Windows before I switched to Linux, so it's not like I really need my Far Cry 5 fix right now, but it would be great if I was able to play Far Cry 5 in Linux. Unfortunately, that is not the case, and I only hope that in time Proton will support Far Cry 5 and other games that I cannot play in Linux at this moment, at least. So the games, you're gonna probably need some games, but if you're lucky like me, there are tons of games that you can play natively or supported by Proton in Linux. A very good site that I use a lot when I want to check if a certain game is working is protondb.com. You can just search for a game, let's say Alien Isolation. What does it say? Damn, it says it's native. Boom, that's just great. Because I have a Alien Isolation, I haven't played the game in Linux. I played this game in Windows a couple of years ago, and it's gonna be a blast, I'm sure, when I run it in Linux. So ProtonDB is a wonderful source to check if you can run a game in Linux or not. Third con, in my opinion, is that it takes time to learn a new system. It takes really sweat and sometimes blood, not figuratively, but it does take time to learn completely new operating system or distribution. In my case, that is Linux Mint, and it really takes time to learn new applications, program. I was used to, as I said a million times before, Adobe package, with Photoshop and Illustrator. Right? I had to learn Scribus or Inkscape and so on. So it does really take time to learn new thing. And just like, it is really customary and totally normal to use terminal in Linux. This is not something that we know in Windows, that we use that a lot, like CMD. you can, but and it is really useful. And I would say that do not be, if you switch to Linux, do not be afraid of terminal. It's a great tool to do things in Linux, be it copying a file or just update your system. I mean, how cool would you look to your Windows newbie friends if you just fire up this command sudo apt update, look those lines coming down, and they will just say, damn dude, you're a hacker. I'm joking. No, but these things, terminal gets things done. Just updating your system or installing a certain application is just piece of cake. Instead of going, in Windows, I had to go to internet, browser, and let's say I want to install a certain media player, like VLC. I had to go to VLC's web page and download the file and install it. In Linux, you can just use your terminal or software manager. Software manager, you can just, and it is wonderful. It's so easy, and it is so much better than what is called in Windows Shop, Windows whatever, which I remember was totally stupid and unusable. So you just search for VLC, it comes here, and it's already installed on my system, and it's so easy. Firefox or whatever, it just comes up and you just install it or remove it. And the same thing is in the install Firefox. Yeah, and it says Firefox is already installed, and I have the newest version. And so terminal has a lot of commands to use, and which are so useful and make your online and digital life so much easier. And I was talking about learning new system that and new apps, and it sucks in Linux, but I know this makes it sound positive, and it really is. I was using Windows almost for 30 years now, and it's been great, but it's also very good, just like refreshing and giving a new breath to your new hardware. Me being using Linux as a new OS or distribution also gave me a new fresh breath. So it's negative that you have to use some time using this new system and getting used to new apps. But on the other hand, it's great that you get this feeling of being almost, in love. That's what happens when you learn a new system to use, So it's been great. And it's still hard, I'm no in any way I'm an expert on Linux because I'm not, but I am trying to my best, to learn new things and implement them in my daily life when using my computer, and so far it's been great. Fourth con using Linux is that it needs a lot of work to learn Linux and all its facets. It just takes time, and I can't say much more on this topic except that you just need to sit down and be careful and be focused, and it will be fine. Fifth and last con, in my opinion, using Linux is that you are never sure if your hardware is supported by Linux. Buying a new computer and installing a Windows operating system on it is probably gonna be pretty painful unless you have some really niche hardware. But Linux, you just can't count on your new laptop will gonna be just running fabulously, with your Ubuntu or Manjaro or Linux Mint. It really needs finding out if your laptop or computer is gonna run smoothly without any troubles. But in my experience, most of computers, most of hardware, and most of laptops will work in Linux. Unless, again, you're using some really strange hardware and laptops, and I never experienced that so far. So these are my pros and cons from a inexperienced Linux user, and that's it for this time. Bye yo.